All right. Looks like everybody who's settling down is going to settle down here, so why don't we just kick things off? I always like to have the people who are building the products introduce themselves. So we're going to go this way first, and then we'll come back. So Rob, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, tell us a little bit about Read AI.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having us here. First of all, my name is Rob. I'm the CTO. I'm also a co-founder of Read AI. There were 3 founders. We think of ourselves as an independent productivity AI tool, which is a very, very wordy, general set of things. But what we do is we try to be best of breed in information distillation and organization, and we emphasize the independent part because we think it's important that that's all we focus on and all we care to do, and we're not trying to sell you something else in that process.
Very cool. Yujing?
Hi, everyone. My name is Yujing. Thanks for having me here. So I'm from GMI Cloud. I'm the head of engineering in GMI Cloud. So we are a neo cloud that's focusing specifically on GenAI infrastructure, or to everyone's more familiar words, GPUs. We do products like private GPU clusters. We provide API endpoints, or help our customers build their own inferencing endpoints. So either layers of the infrastructure, we can help with that. We make sure we deliver the highest quality and the best SLA. We have a team, we have a worldwide team and different clusters in either US or APAC area.
Tony.
Hey, thank you for having me here. I'm Tony, CEO, co-founder of Inngest.com. So we're a workflow orchestration platform, essentially allow you to create step functions that orchestrate AI or agents, put them into production on your own infrastructure. We handle the state, orchestration, queuing, retries, flow control, multi-tenant concurrency, that sort of stuff. So SDK that you drop into your existing application, and you get all that stuff architecturally for free.
Awesome. So why do we call this panel the AI stack? Because each of these 3 people are working on different pieces of the AI stack. And how many of you guys are building AI applications and using GPUs? Raise your hand. All right. And how many of you guys are not touching the LLMs themselves, but leveraging pre-built AI applications and accessing it through some sort of UI? All right. And how many of you guys are using some sort of framework to orchestrate AI applications in production? Great. So I think all 3 of these people will say things that are useful to all of you. So we're going to come this way now. And tell us about the story of Inngest. So I've heard the story, of course. You guys are working on the framework side of things for agents now. How did that come to be? Why are you working on the framework for orchestration of agents?
Cool. Yeah, so prior to Inngest, I used to run engineering at a healthcare company. Healthcare is super workflow driven. You got like the patients, the doctors, prescriptions, all this sort of stuff. Genuinely a nightmare to build. You end up with a bunch of queues, events, Kafka, all of your architecture kind of spanning this difficult mess. So we wanted to build a really simple API so that you could declaratively in code say, this step runs, we should wait for this particular event to happen, like the patient picking up their prescription. And then we should, if they don't pick up the prescription, do this or do that. So that every developer, if you're a front-end developer, can write this code and understand what to do, rather than the whole Kafka queuing mess. That maps really, really well to AI, because it turns out that AI is workflows. You do some RAG as a step. You do some LLM or inference calls as a step. You do some post-processing as a step. And maybe you do some more inference calls based off of the previous result. So it's essentially step functions. So while we built this platform to solve the general infrastructure and make this really easy for developers, it turns out that people were using us for AI because it fit the purpose so well. And so the level of abstraction is that we don't mandate or dictate what you should do for RAG. You can do anything in a step. You can use any particular RAG. You can use any particular model call. But it turns out that it worked really well.
Yeah, and Yujing, I know you're next, by the way. So I know you used to run your own startup, and now you're building things on GPUs. So tell us about what you're building on these GPUs, and what is it that you're doing that's like unique from, let's say, I just have a GPU and I want to run inference?
Yeah, when we first started this business, I mean, definitely GPUs are already a hype. Everyone's trying to find GPUs for their trainings. So we think GPUs as not only a commodity, but only a necessity for the entire industry. Like what Jensen has mentioned in the keynotes at this point, well, we are trying to be a good factory. So I know if I just give you a GPU, probably some people can use it, some people will struggle using it, and some people might even fail using them. But one thing we realize, especially in this new trend, is you have to have a lot of GPU nodes enabled to scale out. And having a lot of nodes basically means higher efficiency, better pricing. So we basically will handle everything for you. So you only need to care about either API or only need to care about a ready-to-go environment if you want to, for example, do your own training or set up your own inferencing framework. For some startups, we realized like they don't even want to touch the inferencing side at all. They just want a robust, high accuracy, well-aligned API set. We can help them set it up. And because we have a large fleet in our inventory, we have the flexibility to basically provide you with different clusters based on your different needs. Somebody, for example, some customer from Europe cares really about their security, like there's some certain compliance that requires their cluster to be in specific areas. So the more resource we have, the better we can to accommodate all these different needs. And one thing I think also brings people's attention these days is we have this curve of token throughput versus latency. So I know for some use cases, latency is super critical, but for some use cases, people care more about the throughput or the cost efficiency. If you go through a traditional either API providers or OpenAIs or cloud, they have very good quality, but sometimes I think what stops people from continue using is their price is a little bit high. And you can't really customize the sweet spot you want. But for us, we want to provide a flexible way for each of our enterprise customers to pick their own sweet spot rather than using some predefined ones.
Cool. So the economies of scale lets you have more flexibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Rob. So as far as I know, Read AI has been around since before 2022. And the introduction of LLMs has been, landscape changing for everybody. You guys work with voice tech, so how's that been for you? How's that impact been? How's that journey been?
Yeah, Read AI started with a heavy analytics focus. This was born out of COVID, and you're right, we're about 4 years old now. It was early 2021. The number one or number two complaint in virtually every information worker's annual employee survey, whatever the case may be, was always too many meetings. And so when we started, it was a heavy analytics focus, trying to understand what is a good use of people's time. So we actually have a patent portfolio on engagement methodologies in enterprise settings. If you do things like model a meeting as a talk graph and try to figure out, are there really two distinct meetings? Are people disengaged? What's going on here, and how can we help relieve some of the pain? That's where we started. And then through the early years and the first pilots and the first feedback, this goes back to the ICP conversation and StatSig and things like that. We learned that maybe that was a bit of an overly simplified approach, and there are really two options. You can either remove meetings from people's calendar, or you can actually help them get more out of the experiences and the way that they're spending their time. And so we got into content retention. We got into meeting notes. Obviously, that's what many people knew us for originally. And then that really expanded into, fatigue with meetings in many cases is fatigue with information and fatigue with just cognitive load. And so how can we help bridge content? How can we use the engagement methodology that we have, use what you say as essentially labeled data on what you care about, and try to give people just the information that they need, just when they need it, from all of their sources to try to provide this safety net. And I've personally felt my own shift in this. It's embarrassing to say too that I've also realized just how many things I'm sure I was dropping the ball on before when I didn't have things captured and reminders following up. But that was how we got started before the advent of modern language models, and then built up the stack through the content retention and distillation. And really that timing was great from our perspective because we built the infrastructure. Getting the scale to go to 1 million meetings is like a hard baseline, and then understanding how to go above that and make use of new tools worked out pretty well.
Awesome. So are you using any frameworks for GPU clouds?
We are not yet.
Okay. So I think one of the things that is pretty clear to me is that you guys are all working in very crowded spaces. There's a ton of people who want to build something similar to what you're building. So how do you think about, and I'll start this way, so Rob, we'll start with you. How do you think about being unique, being different, standing out from the competition?
So I think that there are a couple of ways to think about that. One is, obviously if we have meeting transcription and summarization and recording playback and things like that, the very natural first question from very reasonable people like yourselves and investors is, well, why wouldn't somebody just use Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini, right? Something like that. So when I think about competition, I step back and I realize that if you view competition solely through a list of competitors, maybe a set of columns for each competitor and a row for every feature, and you just look at this matrix, you're going to miss a lot, right? If you view it through list of features, Slack shouldn't exist at all. How many, right, applications with almost the same features existed before it? So I think you really do have to, and the way that I think about competition is through what are we doing differently in our approach? How are our motivations and reward functions different than other people in market, and is that good or bad for the users that we have, our customers? And that's why in the intro when I focused on the independent productivity AI app, I think there's a tremendous difference in the product that you will build if your goal is to support your existing Office suite or video conferencing application or whatever the case may be, or if your goal is wholly to do this one thing really, really well. And so just regularly checking in on that, I think, has been critical for us. And we spend a lot of time thinking about, challenging, are we doing the right thing from a value perspective? Do we still have the right incentives and alignment with our users?
Yeah.
But it's a process.
Right incentives with your users, all the right values. That makes a lot of sense. Yujing, how do you guys think about this? There's so many neo clouds.
There's so many cloud providers. There's the big fours. So yes, it's a pretty tight competition. But I would say all thanks to all these startups, everybody here, this booming industry. So we do see a insanely increasing demand when it comes to compute as well, especially with the recent inferencing and the reasoning models. So from our perspective, I would see competition is not really a bad thing. On one side, it helps you to focus on your strength. On the other side, it basically forces you to think about what is your ideal ICP when you actually go to market. What other enterprise you want to focus? What are the enterprise might be suitable for maybe your competitors? Because we have a growing cake at this point, so it's actually good for different competitors go pursue different directions rather than trying to come up with everything at the same time and trying to catch up on others with the same set of features. We're not trying to do that. So we're basically focusing on our own strength, focusing on our own ICPs, basically those enterprise that has their special need for infrastructures.
Yeah, okay. Focusing on your unique aspects, basically. Yep. Yeah. Tony?
Yeah, I think all really interesting points. And a question that I have when it comes to competition is, what do people nowadays build with? How often are they vibe coding their way to product discovery, which is cool. When you're building a product, I think there's this element of, and I think the static person mentioned this beforehand, having product intuition versus discovery with the product. And I think that when you build a company, you have this idea of what you want to build. And you have this notion of how it should work. And as you build it, you end up discovering the product as well. So it sort of tells you the answer, and the customers tell you what they want to see, and they tell you that things are good or bad. And I think that overall, yeah, you might have a lot of people in the same space as you. You might have people try and steal some of your features or copy some of your features, which is a good thing. But the question that I ask when that happens is, how intuitively do they understand the product? Are they copying it from first principles? What's your positioning, and how well do you know the product? How fast can you deliver? And the positioning comment is really interesting. I think like if you take a look at, any particular industry, there's companies that target enterprises. There's companies that position themselves for SMBs, for the mid-market. I think like companies are in general extremely interesting because you can differentiate in so many aspects. And I think that AI in particular is super interesting because it helps you do this much faster than ever. So if you are building a company now, you can do a lot. Does that mean that competition is always going to be there? Like, yeah, I think more than ever, people can vibe code their way to a semi-decent product that can compete with you nowadays, which is cool. And then another question from that is, what's people's moats? If you can build a product in 5 days that gets you something, how defensible is that as well? And competition is now more common than ever. So I think overall, to take this to its extreme, you would need to think about the defensibility and the sort of network effect that your product can have overall, and how you can make things better by incorporating many things into your product.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I was going to ask something else, but I guess I might as well ask here was, how do you think about that? How do you think about having a defensible product and incorporating the right things into your product?
Yeah, so industry, I guess dependent on the industry, but for us in particular, because we do workflows, we do step functions, for us, when you send events over to Inngest, because functions are event-driven, you might have a user sign up, you might have a user request a new particular inference result, for example. You send an event over to Inngest, and then your functions will run automatically with low latency. We store both the events and the inputs and outputs in each particular step call, so you get all the observability by default. Because the orchestration level does this. It runs your product. And so the observability data is actually a derivative of the orchestration. We have all of that for you because you need to see this when you're debugging or when you're building the application. And this gives you really interesting network effects in which the events you send us are facts about what's happening in your business. So it will tell you user signups, it will tell you which products they purchased, it will tell you everything about what your users are doing in general. And then the observability layer will give you the inputs and outputs of the AI calls. It will give you the tool calls and agents, and it will give you the overall stack, which is cool from a data set perspective, because then you get the stuff you need to make sure that it's running in production. But it's also cool from like a data set perspective, in that you can do fine tuning if you really wanted to, if you downloaded that data, or you can make sure that your models are running performantly if you partner with somebody that does evals, for example, because we don't do evals, we just give that data elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so over time, I think the network effect of the events and the data is interesting. A lot of people talk about long-term memory in AI, which is cool, and that will presumably be a thing as people build more and more agents. And long-term memory is essentially, what facts do I know about this user's activity? And if you're sending events somewhere that automatically record facts about what your users do, it's a short ask to say, can you give me relevant information about this user so that I can populate this into my inference or my model or my agent? And I think overall that is a flywheel which is pretty cool for AI products. So long term, well, not even long term, medium term, that's exactly where we go, because we already have this data and we already do it for you to a degree.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good question to take down the line. So we'll just come back. Yujing, how do you think about building defensibility, building a moat around what you guys are doing?
Yeah, one thing is, especially in this industry, one thing we see is the trend of open sourcing has been never this fast. Before, people can just build a moat and maybe hold it for a year, for at least several months. advancement, but now if you build something on your own, you probably got to be catch up by open source communities in a couple of weeks or only a couple of months. And they will basically have the on-par performance, for example, when it comes to inferencing efficiencies. Like the open source community just won't stop. They won't sleep. You see commits every single hours from different committers. Like if you take, for example, VLM as a very good example, they have 700 contributors to one single project.
Yeah.
Like which company can afford 700 developers on one single product, right? It's really hard to compete unless you're like the mega enterprise. You're the giants. So from our perspective, we have to, in this industry, you have to find something that's unique, and you need to really work together with the open source community in some way. But on the other side, I think you have to leverage your uniqueness. For example, for us, we are really good at setting up clusters, setting up nodes, and we're really good at high-speed network communications. So one of the things that open source community is very good at is everyone can have their own laptop coding on their own single testing machines. But for us, we're focusing more on a system integration level, how we can actually ship an entire solution, how we can make, for example, optimizations on a larger scale of nodes, which is beyond the capability of open source communities. So that's basically our strategy. We see competitors having their own way of doing things as well. Some might actually focusing on getting the 2C side of the customers, getting the data flywheels going, which is also a very good approach, because one of the things that an open source community can't compete with us is they don't really have the user base. So I think especially for a lot of 2C companies, as long as you have a large enough user base, you basically have advantage. You have all the data that's already in your cloud, in your storage, that you can hold them as an edge for you. You can train different models, you can do different tweaking on your own system, and those things cannot be replicated. One good example is people these days struggle to find the right benchmark when it comes to evaluating how good your model is. And it's also very hard for either cloud providers or API providers to come up with the right benchmark for API efficiency. Like Jensen used, for example, 1K, 2K as input-output in his keynote, but one funny thing is the example he picked actually generated almost 9,000 tokens as an output. So we know that, and we've seen that a lot in day-to-day work as well, because we know it's really a hard problem to solve. And you can't really have a one-fits-all benchmark or solution for every single enterprise, because everyone is tackling different scenarios. So I would say that could be the mold. The actual user interaction, the knowledge you have in that specific industry is your mold.
Yeah, distribution and feedback.
Yep.
Rob?
I think those are all really good points. I'm going to offer a hot take on moats, if I can, because I think they covered a lot of good stuff. I have a similar spiel on tech debt, but I won't go into that now. But on moats, whenever investors would ask, what's your moat? How is this defensible?
Yeah.
I actually really liked that as a starting point to a conversation, because I think you can just pull at it and get 10 different conversations going. So if what they're asking is, why are you going to build the best product as compared to somebody else, it's going to be all of the experience that you get having the customers and the distribution and those feedback channels going. If it's a moat in a literal, like how are you going to lock your users in, then I'll say I don't really care to do that. Thank you very much. I want to come every day and build the best product, and if they want to walk away, then they should probably walk away and apologize to them. But we think about the defensibility as really how do we get the most expertise in this space possible faster than somebody else can learn. And we did that early on when we started with such a heavy analytics focus with engagement, and realizing that sentiment and engagement in a corporate setting is super different than sentiment and engagement in any open source model that you look at that's trained on vacation photos, because You almost never, I won't say never, but you almost never sit in a conference room like smiling like you're on the beach in Hawaii, right? So positive sentiment looks totally different in a corporate environment when you're talking in a sales context. So we think about it through how do we develop the best muscle to respond, and how do we get the most feedback to respond to, and how do we just have that motion going, and then just try to meet the needs however you can. And a related question to building the moat in the defensible business is, you could surface it in metrics form too, where some investors might say, how much time are your users spending on your site every day? And I would openly say, I don't care. If they get all the value they need from their subscription because we send them a recap email or an email 30 minutes before their next meeting with what action items they had last time, or they want to engage with us via the Slack app and never once go to read.ai in a browser, totally fine with me. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, I love that approach. So, okay, so this is the question that I was going to ask before Tony brought up this very good topic here. Do you see any particular industries or verticals that have really adopted your product that you didn't expect? We'll go down this way again.
Yes.
Well, which ones?
It's been neat to watch. There's like this wave of realization that people are overwhelmed. And it sort of ripples through different sectors. And so this was maybe 2 summers ago. We had 1 or 2 quarters straight where the construction industry was adopting Read AI for all of their meetings and email digestion and summarization and things like that. And if you'd asked me when we were starting out, that wouldn't have been the top of my list. Maybe I'm not very creative. I don't know. But really, you see industries where there's a lot of cross-communication between organizations, between an architecture firm and a GC and various subcontractors. We saw that those were the hotspots that first realized they needed better ways to manage their information, and they needed heterogeneous data. They weren't entirely living in a Microsoft stack, or maybe they were, but their customers use Zoom, or any number of things. And so we'll see those ripples through different industries as they kind of wake up and say, maybe it's time for this tool. And so I would definitely say construction is one, but we've also seen like oil operations in Africa using it because of just disparities in time zone. And we realized there's both the volume of information that people have, and then there's also how convenient is it to share information across Africa to Asia as you're shifting over operations and things like that. So it's absolutely been outside of what I would have thought, but it's really neat. It's fascinating. It's neat to wake up every day and learn something new.
Yeah, I'm equally surprised. That sounds very cool. What about you, Yujing?
Well, we help a lot of customers when it comes to, I would say, non-traditional infrastructure requirement.
Okay.
Customers sometimes usually come to us when they can't really find a perfect fit on, for example, hyperscalers, or they have some special requirement that's just cannot be fulfilled. So basically, we can help them virtualize every layer in the infrastructure side. Some of the customer want, for example, special RDMA through the disk. We can help them set it up, which you can't really find many options in the market at this point. So I would say one of those best ICPs we have are the customer that has some special requirement for the infrastructure. Another end of the story is we slowly to see a lot of small business, especially those Asian startups, starting to picking up on our inference as well. One thing I realized is they usually have very unique requirement or very specific requirement when it comes to API need. For example, some of them say they want to have like a super high concurrency out of a sudden. So they really care about that throughput when the traffic hits. Some of them say they just want a super quick, but with a very high precision alignment, which I know some API providers might be neglecting that perspective. So those kind of special requirements that cannot be found, I would say, from a common denominator, they usually come to us for very customized solutions. Yeah.
Cool. Tony?
Cool. I think it's interesting because we're all at different levels of AI.
Yeah.
You know, from like the consumer to the hardware to the operating and the orchestration. So it's interesting to hear the previous answers. I think like for us, when to be honest, starting in 2021, pre-AI craze, the biggest thing was AI. And when you're developing with AI, it turns out that you want to be able to iterate really, really quickly because speed of development is maybe the #1 thing, you know? Not only does AI change every day, every hour, like you need to be able to keep up with that change, you know? Whether it's a new model release, whether it's a new way of working, whether it's like the whole agent thing or MCP. The fundamentals of what you build to make your product work continue to adapt relatively quickly, whether that's week on week or month on month. And so when you're developing with AI, you need to, generally speaking, not be constrained to one way of working. And you know, GPUs are a thing. You need GPUs to run inference. So it's a given that you're going to be running on GPUs somewhere. Everything else in the architecture can be a bit of a constraint, to be frank. Whether or not you're using queuing systems, whether or not you're using events to manage things, you know, at some point you mentioned super high throughput and you have a bunch of requests coming in, so super high concurrency. If your users are, you know, unfair and one of your users is relatively large and they send through 10,000 requests while your other users are sending through 100, you want that to be balanced adequately so that one user doesn't outcompete another. And in order to do so, you need to build up all of these sort of things in your AI product that is relatively frustrating and slow you down inevitably. And so the overall point, I think, for us was that we ended up solving that problem and that it made AI a surprise. But generally speaking, I think it makes a lot of sense because of how you need to develop with AI. And I think like that will continue to happen, you know, as MCP becomes a bigger thing. Don't know if it can get any bigger right now. It's kind of like all you hear about on Hacker News every day. So can it get any bigger? But as MCP becomes more of a thing and as agents become more of a thing, which are also this crazy just state machine type loop, I think like agents are a black box of craziness right now. And we will end up with really, really, really solid patterns over the year to figure that out. But yeah, I think largely speaking, the way that people develop now has changed, and that is generally a surprise. Yeah, it's fun to help, though.
Yeah. We've only got a few minutes left here, so I'm going to go into the lightning round of fun facts, and then we will open it up for a couple audience questions. So, Tony, if you were a soda, which soda would you be?
Ooh, only know a few, so going to go with Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper.
Oh,
Fun.
dude, were you the same?
Oh, you were going to say Dr. Pepper?
Yes. Yes.
It's okay. You can take the same
Hell yeah.
answer.
Hell
Eugene,
yeah.
what were you
Okay,
going to say?
I'll change. Oh, ginger ale.
Oh, ginger ale.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Or ginger beer. That
Ginger
one's
beer. That,
it's more. Yeah.
okay.
There's more to it.
Okay.
Actually, I should probably be ginger ale then.
This guy has too many sodas. Yujing, if you were a soda, which one would you be?
Well,
Eugene's like, I don't drink soda, man.
yeah. I mean, I don't really. I usually just drink. I don't really usually drink soda. If I have to pick, I just pick Coke Zero. Probably it's a boring
Coke
answer, I
Zero.
know. But yeah, I can't really adjust to Dr. Pepper at this point. I tried a couple times. I think the flavor is very interesting, but I can't grow fond on.
You're a Dr. Pepper fan, Rob?
So I don't really drink a lot of soda anymore, but Dr. Pepper has a special place in my heart because back when I was in college, I was bored one day and I had a can of Dr. Pepper, and there's a little like questions or comments you can call this number thing. And I thought, I actually have a couple of questions. Okay. And specifically, I wanted to know, why is it the case that in some regions, Dr. Pepper seems to be at restaurants that serve Coke products, and in other regions, it'll be associated with Pepsi products? What's going on here? And so I called and had a lovely conversation with this person about their distribution channel.
Yeah.
And it stuck with me. I did the same for Sour Patch Kids
Okay.
as well.
If you guys want to know about that answer, you're going to have to come find Rob later. All right, we'll ask one more question. If you have a tip for anyone who's building a company in the AI space right now, what would it be?
Are we starting with me?
We're starting with you and going
All
that
right.
way.
Think about how people are going to find you. Distribution matters more than anything. You could build something totally beautiful, and if they don't find you, it's just a shame.
Eugene?
Well, I would say leverage open source community and leverage AI tooling.
Oh, okay. Tony?
Very much agree with distribution. Speed of iteration as well is like up there, you know. one of the really, really, really amazing things about building a young company is that you can develop and change things so quickly, and you should 100% use that to your advantage while you explore and learn the product that you're building.
Awesome. Well, I guess that makes sense because I help a lot with all three of those things. All right, audience questions. Who has some questions?
Hi, I'm a little different because I'm actually a researcher, and I'm researching AI and therapeutic mental health interventions. So whenever I hear talk about startups, AI, et cetera, there's a worry that I have, which is the human element. So I wanted to ask about how we can better integrate topical experts to assist with content retention, engagement for in the mental health space, safety reasons as well. As those who are producing the AI models are typically not the content experts.
That is okay. So hearing the question back, mental health, how does that work with AI experts and making sure that things are safe, generally speaking, as an overall thing? The content side of things. Cool, sure, yeah. So content experts and all this stuff. So there's a bunch of research out there, like deep research. There's a bunch of stuff that was done. Actually, I can't remember who blogged about this, but somebody blogged about this recently. They do reverse RAG. And essentially one of the things that you have with content experts is how do you know what you're saying in this black box of magic is correct? And how does it match what content experts had previously said in a healthcare context, which is super important. There was this company that mentioned a couple weeks ago, also on Hacker News, about doing reverse RAG to make sure what they are saying is generally correct. And largely speaking, there's no way to know if the black box of AI that's doing all this magic is correct without having something to compare it to. And so firstly, understanding that as an assumption means that when you have this particular thing, spew out some data, spew out some text, this other company, which I wish I could remember, is doing reverse RAG, so they analyze the content that the model creates, do RAG on it, vectorization, compare it to stuff that they had previously stored in terms of experts, and then they analyze it to say, how well does this match what has previously happened? Which is useful and a good barometer to say, is this thing largely correct or largely not? I think stuff like this has to happen, and it also happens a bunch in deep research to give you quotes, to give you, like the perplexity style sort of, sources, as you were. This sort of stuff is more and more common, and is again why AI is just a sequence of steps. And I think again, breaking it down to its fundamentals, it's more of a factor of how well do we know that this thing is doing the right thing. And these techniques exist, and I think will become a lot more refined over time. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that's the first thing that popped into my mind.
I would just add really quickly, I agree with all of that, and I think appropriately scaling back confidence by default and providing citations wherever possible is a really appropriate, responsible approach when answering things that could be interpreted in many ways.
There is a good paper called Storm, which was a couple years old now. Storm does exactly what you said. It's very similar to deep research. And it generates a whole bunch of sources, a whole bunch of knowledge stuff by doing RAG. They summarize it all in this fat workflow, and then they ask an LLM to incorporate everything, and then again do fact checking towards the end. Stuff like this is when you want to be completely correct, what you need to be doing, and obviously there's no way to say completely correct in a non-deterministic environment.
Yeah, I also agree to the two speakers, and I feel like from our observation, what enterprise has been doing, I think there's a very broad spectrum regarding how the retrievers should be built. On the very narrow side, you might come to the regular RAG. Basically, people just throw a bunch of their own knowledge base into it. On the other side, basically, you can search the entire internet without validating if the source is actually valid. And I think there's actually a lot of opportunities on this broader spectrum because everyone basically come up with their own solutions. Like reverse reg is one of the popular way of doing it, but it might not fit for every single situation. So we do see different companies, especially companies that come from the traditional retriever or indexer domain that are actually focusing on building product to help people to better utilize their knowledge base and better utilize the web search capabilities.
Hey, the question's for Rob. Rob, I want to understand the distribution part that you just talked about before. Traditionally, a lot of the tools that are used in enterprises used to go down the enterprise sales route and multi-months of the whole process of convincing people to buy the licenses, etc. But with Read and a lot of other tools, especially around note-taking, there's been a bottoms-up adoption where people just find the tools themselves, invite them into the meetings, and then start using for their own personal productivity. Want to understand how do you think about these two different segments, and is the focus for the next few years primarily for apps like yourselves going to be more on the bottoms up, or because enterprises where the big money is, but then bottoms up is where easier adoption is? So want to understand a lot more about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question and something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last 4 years. So when we look at distribution, there are a couple of important pieces to it. One of the most significant, though, is am I reaching somebody who's likely going to have any interest in purchasing a tool? And so through that lens, things like being in the Zoom App Store was actually phenomenal distribution, because you'll find organizations that by definition have said, we will pay for a SaaS product that meets our needs in some particular way. Because almost in all the cases where people are using and paying for Zoom as an organization, they already have Office 365 or G Suite or something else. They could be using Teams or Google Meet for free. And so thinking about what it implies to be presented in a certain forum is really, really important. But to the bottoms up, top down, I think that they meet in the middle either way. I think the challenge with going bottoms up the way that we have gone is that it means you have to build a product in two modes. One is, can an individual user who identifies their own problem and signs up and gives their credit card and integrates their data, can they get value out of it alone? And then the other is the top-down approach, which is the product better the more people within an organization are using it? And so if you take a top-down approach, you get the benefit of only having to build for that one multiplayer, as we call it, scenario where you can provide value based off of this network effect within an organization. But it does mean that you have to have perhaps really speculative long sales cycles with large organizations that may or may not pan out, and you may or may not get a foot in the door. So we wanted it to be, and we see this in South America. We saw a lot of growth there. We wanted to make it the case that we could be the first AI consumer experience many people have. And in many regions, they're underserved by language models or transcription models not supporting local dialects, things like that. We wanted it to be the case that an individual could sign up and get value and get exposure, and then take that memory with them wherever they go. And so we've got tens of thousands of people in Colombia, in universities, students signing up, using us, aggregating their data, things like that. They'll take that with them wherever they go. We think that that's a worthwhile long-term investment. We want them to show up at a company and have a preference for the tools. Just like if I took a job and they said, sorry, we're not going to pay for Slack, I'd be kind of frustrated because it's a really, really low cost relative to the value that I get out of it. So we wanted to cultivate that. That was a choice we made.
I have one question for Yujing. Yeah. Yeah, I work in the big company on the GPU infrastructure. And even right now, we have a lot of challenges to improve the GPU efficiency and hard to keep our customer. So as an engineer, I don't care about how we get the customer, but as a startup, I'm very interested in know that how could you find out your customer? How do you persuade your customers that your product is better than the GPU provided by big companies? And how could you stand out?
Yeah, like I mentioned, it's a good question. So we still want to start with the ideal ICP. For example, especially when you go out for customers and you just build your own product. You want to know exactly what your product is built for and who your product is built for, especially as a small startup when you really started. I remember our first initial couple deals were with customer, like I said, with very specific need that they cannot find in a market. You might think the hyperscalers provides anything, but it's usually not the case. You just really need to dig into, for example, if there's a very specific aspect that there could be a potential customer. One other good way of doing is having your salespersons to talk to different people, to different enterprise, and think about their pain points, and then polish your end product. I think that's really important when it comes to getting the first couple of deals.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. We are out of time for this panel. So we will be doing the next panel.